Okay, good morning everyone. Thanks for coming in. I'm sure more of your classmates will be either coming in or very deathly afraid that they cannot finish their final project report. But rest assured that the final project report is only 20%, 25% of your final score, so more emphasis should be placed on the presentation anyway. Today we're very privileged to have Dr. Gaurav Manik from A-Star NUS Television to come in and talk a bit about the decision-making in AI startups. I've known Gaurav for a very long time. He's a good friend, and he has chocolate for you. So he'll be speaking to us for the next 2.5 hours. Please welcome Dr. Gaurav Manik.
Thank you so much. So for today's class, don't worry about it. You can put your laptops away. You don't need to take any notes at all. Thank you so much. Yeah. The full lecture recording will be available later. Instead, just try to engage in the material. I'm presenting to you a bunch of things that you would likely not yet have seen in business school about the actual nitty-gritty day-to-day aspects of running a business, particularly an AI business. So for background, I'm Dr. Gaurav Manik. I have a PhD in AI and machine learning from Carnegie Mellon. While at Carnegie Mellon, I built an AI software as a service startup called Visigoth. And since leaving Carnegie Mellon, I have moved back to Singapore, joined A-Star, and I've been building a startup doing biomedical imaging through startup called Accelivision. All the opinions I express here, and I'm going to express quite a few opinions, are not my employers. They're my own opinions. So please don't tell them I said something funny. So today's overall lecture will be split into two main sections. The first half is the starting up a company and the business side of things. The second half will be on the AI side of things, along with the special considerations you need to keep in mind when you're building either a startup that uses AI or if you're deploying AI in business. Starting up a company is one of the most difficult things that people like to do. Right? Elon Musk has a quote about this, saying that it's like staring into the abyss and eating glass. It is quite a painful experience. And a large part of that pain is driven by the fact that startups fail. They fail a lot. You have roughly 50% chance of failing in the 5-year horizon. And they fail for a bunch of reasons. Everything from financial issues to lack of market need, all the way down to just being sued into oblivion. This happens quite routinely to startups. So one of the questions that we'd like to do, or like to answer, is when we're teetering between life and death as a startup, how can we take away some of these risks? Some things like lack of market need, this is about 1/3 of startups fail for that reason. You can absolutely figure this out long before the startup fails and just not build it. So how do we de-risk specifically all these different challenges that startups face? And a theme that you'll hear over and over again, particularly when you start up a company, when you start talking to VCs, is everybody's trying to spend as much effort as they can to assess what risks are coming up next on your horizon and managing them ahead of time. So this whole lecture, this whole first half of the lecture is going to be about this. So when you start a company up, there are a couple of different ways to break it up into stages. So the way I'm doing it here breaks it up into what you're currently doing at the time. Of course, there are a couple of, like anything in business school, there are a couple of competing ways to do the same thing. This is just the way that I've chosen. I do recommend these other books. They'll be on the reading list for, the optional reading list for today's lecture. So all these different stages, from idea, prototyping, go-to-market, early growth, and maturity. If you work as an employee in a company, you're only going to see the growth and maturity phases. Even if you work as a founding employee, you're one of the first 20 people in a little startup somewhere. You get a small amount of equity as part of your pay. Even that you'll see only from mid-stage onwards. If you work as a consultant, a high-priced consultant from Deloitte or something, you'll only get to see these stages. As a founder, you get access to the idea, the initial prototyping stage. And if you do your job right, you'll be able to see your company all the way through to maturity, if that's the thing you want to do. And this gives you access to more of the experience of building a startup, seeing the initial stages, seeing how things might fail early on. You'll get to join a company or start a company with as few as 1 to 5 people and potentially build it up to be much bigger than that. Okay, so let's say you're a founder, you have an idea, you start with this fantastic idea, and you form a company. What is the, broadly speaking, overall goal of starting a company? Would anyone like to guess? Yes?
Fixing a problem?
Yes? That's a good idea? Yeah, let me offer you one of these. Here. Okay, so you are solving a problem for someone else, right? And in exchange for that, what do you get?
Money.
Yes! 100% correct. So startups, broadly speaking, your goal as a startup is to solve a problem for somebody and sell that solution to someone for money. You can draw a line in the life of your startup that says, this is the point at which I sell someone something for the first time. Everything after this is revenue generating. Everything before this is pre-revenue. The problem with startups is there's always a funding gap associated with it. This gap is when you are spending money in the expectation that you will make money in the future. But right now, you don't have that money yet. So you got to borrow and spend, or you got to raise this funding in somehow. The problem that all startups have, if you ask any startup CEO, they'll have two numbers at the back of their head. One is called their runway, the other is called their burn rate. Would anyone like to guess what runway and burn rate mean? In a second, someone else. Go for it.
Burn rate is like the amount of money you spend on something.
Yeah. Yes. So burn rate is the amount of money you are currently spending every month just to keep the startup running. The runway is the flip side of that, is given your current funding, how many months more can you survive? So every startup CEO will have that at the back of their mind, saying, oh, I've got these many months, I've got these many months, I've got these many months. It's constantly scratching at the back of your mind. And everything you do as a startup CEO is, how can I push that number back? How can I give myself another couple of months to survive? Yes?
In practice, how public are these numbers?
Oh, not at all, not even slightly. Not a single person, CEO is going to reveal this number. So it turns out that if you reveal this number, you can very easily put yourself in a terrible negotiating position. If an investor knows that you have no cash flow at the moment, you're about to go bust in another 2 months, they can get you to agree to the kind of terms that a 12-month runway startup would not even consider. So you have to be, these numbers are kept extremely private. So you have to know this better than anyone else, and you have to guarantee that no one else knows this as well as you. So here's the question. Where do I get the money from? So you've heard of VCs, I'm sure. Does anyone know what VC stands for? Yes?
Venture capital.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Yeah. Venture capitalists, yes, okay. You already have one. Save it for later. Okay, but they don't all come in one type. In fact, we'll go into detail on this later, how the capital market is structured overall. But you can raise different kinds of rounds, starting from very smaller and lower risk, higher risk rounds at the start, to larger rounds later on. Importantly, there is this all-consuming thing called the pre-seed round, also known as the FFF round. Does anyone want to guess what FFF is? Yep. That's right. Catch? Perfect. Yeah, friends, family, and fools. Those are the only 3 people who invest in super early stage pre-seed startups. That's the joke, certainly. When your money comes in a pre-seed stage, excuse me, okay. So this is, of course, where the investment and how the investment comes in, really structured in varying terms. As you go further to the right, the amount gets larger and the risk the person is taking on you gets correspondingly lower. We'll talk about this in a bit as well, how as you move further down, you've already taken up and dispensed with certain kinds of risks that whoever funds is no longer taking. Here's the question. What are you giving up in exchange for money? No one's getting money for free over here. Everyone's trading something for money. What are you trading for money? Yes?
Either or equity or debt.
Yes. Fantastic. All right. Catch?
Yeah.
Perfect. Either equity or debt. So equity is part ownership stake of your company, and debt is an agreement to pay it back later. Debt is not difficult for a startup to take up, right? Because if you're formed as an LLC and you take on a certain amount of debt and you can't pay it back, Well, your startup goes bankrupt, and you basically walk away from the burning pile of its remains, and no one owes, and you don't owe anyone anything anymore personally. That's the theory behind it. So that's why almost nobody will fund your startup purely on debt. This happens only in some cases, and with certain instruments, safe notes and whatnot, that you can build that are debt related, but not strictly speaking pure debt. Equity is the real name of the game. What equity is a certain amount of value and a certain amount of ownership in your company. They're both the right to make decisions and the right to take whatever profit you make regarding your company. So if you make a certain amount, or if you have some decisions to make, it is possible for these decisions, depending on the company constitution, will typically be made as a matter of percentage voting rights. So if you've given away, let's say, more than half of your company, you can end up in a position where you accidentally lose the right to make certain big decisions. But at the very start, people will not tend to charge all that much in terms of equity. So these are roughly the percentages of equity you'll be giving up. Now, bear in mind something interesting about this, right? If you give up 10% in the pre-seed or friends, family, and fools round, you have 90% left. Then you give up 20% off your 90%, you give a quarter of that again. You can very easily dilute yourself down to absolutely nothing. I've spoken to a couple of founders who have accidentally done this to themselves, where at the end of 6 or 8 rounds of funding, they're now left with 5% of their original company. And sure, the 5% is worth more. The total company is worth more, but it didn't scale by 20 times the value. So now they've lost money personally, even though the company has grown. And this dilution risk is something that first-time founders are very prone to do. Because especially when you're a first-time founder, you think, oh, what's the difference between 10 and 15% in the pre-seed stage? It turns out it's quite a lot. Another warning that you'd get or give as a first-time or early founder is you can easily agree to relatively innocuous sounding terms that are very bad later. Certain convertible debt instruments, for example, you can borrow, say, $100,000, and then you end up, because the company grows fast enough, you have to pay back, or you have to give up equity worth millions later on. That sort of thing you can do. You can enter into, the other problem I've seen happen often is distributorship contracts. You find a distributor is willing to work with small companies, you scale beyond what the distributor can provide, but you've signed an exclusive distributorship contract. You're stuck with them. Right? You have to pay this company a large amount of money to get out of that contract so you can pick a distributor who can actually meet the thousands of products a month you're shipping. That kind of thing happens quite often. So before you agree to these sort of terms, you need to get some sort of professional advice. Right? This is the warning part. And the last big red flag is that you are at an information disadvantage about external issues. So when you go to someone to raise money, you go to VC to raise money, you're not the only one raising money. There are hundreds of startups at varying stages going to the same set of VCs to raise money. And they get to hear the inside details, the private details of the inside of every one of these companies that you have no possible way of accessing. So they know how the market works better than you. They've been in the market longer than you. They know how the insides of your competitors work in a way that you can't possibly know. So when it comes to external issues, you are at a tremendous information disadvantage. So again, this is something you have to take into account when you're when you're trying to raise funds. Any questions so far about the basics of equity? Yes?
What about liquidation?
That's one of those things that you can agree to that is very bad. So the term here, our question asked was liquidation preference. So something that can happen is if you're a founder, you can give up shares that come with an added right that says all of your shares will be paid out in full if the company were to fail before all your debt that I've raised from you in particular will be paid out in full before any debt raised from anyone else, any money raised from anyone else. That is dangerous because some people will not lend to you or will lend on worse terms to you if you have a poor liquidation preference. That said, this is something with some luck you can avoid with a half-decent lawyer. The other thing you'll find is before you make a deal, particularly when you're pre-seed, a lot of these terms can be flexible. You just have to know what to ask for. But once you've agreed to it and you're stuck on it, and you're suffering from the painful part of this later on, then at that point it's too late to fix anything. Okay. So now the next question is, what is the eventual aim of a founder? What does empire, what does exit mean in this case? Anyone would like to guess or give an answer? Make a guess. Yes.
Well, make it growth and have the aspiration to complete milestones with the company, and exit is like selling the company or
Yeah.
exit in an ABO.
Exactly right. That's a fantastic answer. So an empire is basically I'm going to sit on this company for the rest of my working life. I'm just going to keep making it bigger, better, do more with it. I'm going to build this into my empire. It may not be as grand as an empire. It could be as simple as a couple of restaurants or some kind of a laundromat service. But this you're building out a business either for yourself or for your family, and you're just going to do this forever. That's great. If you are looking at your business as a job you want to do for the rest of your life, that's fantastic. You don't worry about the exit. Most entrepreneurs, however, they want to exit their company at some point. And exit in this case means building up a company to the point where it's valuable and then selling off a chunk of that value to someone else for the day-to-day running operation. So you can sit back on a beach in Jamaica or something and sip Mai Tais or whatever drink of your choice. So now I'm going to talk about the exit plan, right? So remember, this is the way that you extract value out of the company that you built. As a founder, you put in 8, 10, 20 years of your life building up this company, making it so that the business it does is valuable and is expected to do a lot of this business in the future. In exchange for that, how do you pull the value out of that? Okay. So the simplest exit plan for a scientist particularly, so I'm trained as a scientist and that's my background, is if someone comes to me and says, I want to buy your intellectual property. Like, I like the product you've made, I like the idea you have, I like this particular patent you have or something. Rather than try to compete with your patent, I'm a big company, you're a small guy, how about I just pay you X amount of money and you come work for me for 2 years and you build this up into a product, I'll give you a chunk of cash in exchange for that. That's fantastic. If it happens extremely rarely. Because one of the lessons you learn when particularly you start doing startups is that the ideas themselves are relatively cheap. It's the effort in proving that they're good in the market that is the expensive portion of any company startup. Or to say the same thing another way, there are many companies with good ideas and relatively few companies that are able to take a good idea and show that it works well in the market. All right. The next step up from this, particularly once you've built out the company a little bit, is you can just get hired out by a competitor. This is not as benign. Sometimes it's quite benign. Sometimes a bigger company will come to you and just buy out the entire leadership team. This happened with Formlabs and Micronics, for example. You can look this example up later. They made a new kind of 3D printer, and Formlabs just went in and just bought out hired out the entire team, lock, stock, and barrel. I think down to the janitor, pretty much. They hired them out. This also happened in Carnegie Mellon. The entire automated driving team was hired out by Uber. Like even the undergrad interns working got like a decent package offer because Uber had so much money. They just wanted to hire out their own self-driving car team. But this is not always benign. Being hired by a competitor, it can also be sometimes that a competitor will reach into your company and pluck out the 1 or 2 people who have all the key knowledge and hire them out strategically. This has been happening recently in the news in Meta, where Meta has been hiring out key employees from OpenAI to build out the AI effort. And they're offering them insane packages, like $200 million a year package, in exchange for jumping ship. For comparison, the head of OpenAI, Sam Altman, makes about $80 million a year. So this is an insane amount of money. And it's not at all benign. This is very much a hostile capture of some of your employees. But this is certainly one way you can extract value from your own company, get hired out by someone. You can also, if you're later on, get bought out by your majority shareholders. This is also typically an acrimonious split. You'll notice a lot of these are not happy right now. And there's a very interesting clause that the people like to put in their company constitution called a shotgun clause or a Texas shootout clause. The idea is that if you have founders who were getting along, built this lovely company, and now the company's about 8, 10 years down, and you hate each other's guts, how do you find a nice, clean way to separate the two of you that makes sure each person gets a reasonable share of the funds? And the answer to that is something called a Texas shootout clause, where any one of the shareholders can make an offer with a certain minimum share size, can make an offer to any other set of shareholders, or to any other shareholder at a certain price, but you have to first give them the right to buy you out at that price. So the way this works, let me give a more concrete example. Is let's say the company's worth, there are two shareholders, me and Kwakao, and the company's worth about $1 million in total. I can come to him and I can offer him, hey, I'll pay you 500K for your half. But I first give him the right to buy me out at 500K. But if he thinks the company is worth more than that, he'll buy me out at 500K. So this incentivizes me to put in the highest offer I can reasonably afford to prevent him from stealing out buying the company out from under me. Again, when you do your startup and you start getting legal advice on your founding documents, you'll go through a series of clauses like this. It's all quite fascinating, and they're all pretty much written in metaphorical blood. Like, things have gone wrong previously for this to be included as standard. M&A is another big thing you'll hear. If you're a large company or if you work in consulting, you'll be doing a lot of M&A over your life. It's just a way to bring in a large company. The only thing interesting about M&A is that acquisition is almost never done for cash. So if you see in the newspaper, XYZ company bought out for $2 billion, there's no one's trucking over $2 billion in a wheelbarrow. Really what's happening is they're doing a stock swap. So in exchange for stock of your small company, for taking over that stock, they will give you equivalent stock in the larger company or in some other instrument, but typically almost always stock of the larger company or the acquiring company. The difference between cash and that, anyone also know the difference between a stock swap and cash is effectively? There's only two big differences. Yep.
Few companies have that much cash on hand, so we just
exactly. It's ridiculous that there was cash on hand. You don't want to have $2 billion in a bank account. You could use it for better things. So the difference is the liquidity of the purchasing company. So if, for example, Microsoft buys you out, you can go tomorrow to any stock exchange and just sell your Microsoft stock and get cash for it. So that's fine, it's not a big deal. But if you go to some other companies that want to buy you out, sometimes it can be difficult to sell shares or sell all the volume of shares you want to sell. Or put another way, if I want to sell 100,000 of the Microsoft shares tomorrow, I won't even touch the price. No one will even notice, given the trading volume. If I sell $40 billion of Microsoft stock, I'm going to cause problems. I'm going to have the SEC knocking on my door saying, come on, what are you doing? This is not allowed. So that's one big difference. So there's the liquidity and the fact that cash is not on hand are the two big differences. You don't want to keep that much cash on hand. Now, there's something called a distressed asset sale. This is a trick that some companies use occasionally. I've seen this being used in the medical space especially. Anyone like to guess what a distressed asset sale is? Someone from this side? Distressed asset sale? Make a guess, yes.
Maybe they're not doing well.
Yes, but the trick is you make them not do well before you buy them. So if you're a big company, let me not name any names. I don't want to get in trouble for that. Let's say you're a big company and you take a look at this little microscopy company. This happened to a friend of mine actually. And you notice, I like their IP. I can buy their business out, but I think they're a bit overvalued. I'm just going to sue them. Doesn't matter for what, just make something up pretty much. And then you drag that out in court. And as a small startup, you don't have the funds to keep a legal team constantly staffed and fed and keep producing or keep defending you. So it's going to deplete your resources somewhat. And as you deplete your resources, as your investors get scared and start pulling out or leaving for greener pastures, you suppress the value of that company, and then you can swoop in and buy it for much cheaper, provided you're willing to wait a little bit and you're willing to exercise your lawyers a little bit. This is a thing that also happens. And finally, dividends are being bought out by private equity. The last part of this is something called a tag-along and a drag-along clause. Anyone would like to guess? So to be clear, these are a tag-along clause protects a minority shareholder and a drag-along clause protects a majority shareholder. Would anyone like to guess what either of these are? Yes?
Yeah, tag-along clauses basically allow small shareholders to basically, if a large shareholder is selling their shares, they can tag at the same price.
Yep.
So basically the buyer is forced to buy those shares at the same price or at the same conditions as the big shareholder ones.
Yep.
And the drag along is the other way around.
Yes.
Basically, if you are a large shareholder and you want to sell, but you need to certain percentage to sell for your buyer, you can force the small shareholders to sell with you at the same price.
That's a fantastic answer. Thank you. That's a very good and very complete answer. So the analogy I'll give you for a drag-along clause is, let's say you have HDB is going on block sale. You need 85 or 90% to agree. That's the drag-along clause. That means if
sorry.
Yeah.
HDBs cannot go on block. And
Oh,
second,
sorry.
and second, this audience, some people in this audience may not know what HDB is.
Okay, in that case, I'll just skip that analogy. That was a pretty perfect answer, as it was a very complete and thorough answer. Thank you. Yeah. So if you are a minority shareholder or a majority shareholder, you want to guarantee that you can't be cut out or blocked from making a large sale by another one of the parties. So these clauses are also included as standard. Okay. So now we've talked about what a startup is, how you extract, why you build one, how you extract value from one at the end when you're exiting it. Now let's talk about the failure rates. Remember at the very start we talked about this tremendous failure rate. Your startup will fail with great probability in narrow windows of time. Here are the filters for each stage, approximately. So initially at the idea stage, sure, you have a great idea. Is that idea actually going to do anything useful for someone else? That's the big question you have to worry about. Is the problem you're solving, is it worth solving at all? Does your idea actually solve the problem that you think it does, or is it solving another problem? And how can you collect money from this by solving this? If you build a perfect solution and you have no way to extract, to get people to pay you for it, it's not worth anything, unfortunately. Once you have this idea and you validate the idea actually works, the next filter you'll be coming up against is finding somebody who actually will pay. Not just that it's possible that someone will pay for it, but someone will indeed fork over cash for this. There can be all kinds of considerations involving purchasing practices, cycles, approvals that will prevent any of these from happening. It can prevent someone who wants to pay you for a product, actually pay you for the product. And other than the product, you also worry about your team. A lot of startup teams tend to fail at around the prototyping to go-to-market stage. Because at this point, the thing that's keeping your team together is hope. More than anything, it's just the hope that something good is going to happen in the future. So once you move on from that, you reach to product market fit. At that stage, your question is not just, can I get someone to pay for this? Can I get enough people to pay for this, to build an actual viable business out of this? It's quite possible to build a product that solves the problem once for a couple of people, and then not be able to generalize that into a business that keeps a stream of people coming in. At this point, a lot of companies will, particularly software companies, will reach this panic where they'll try implementing all sorts of features to capture just a little bit more market share from neighboring, from customers like the ones they already have. Sometimes this goes well, sometimes this goes poorly. This is another one of the filters you have to navigate when you do a startup. Past this product market fit, you reach the point where you're now growing the company. So you have a product, you know people are going to buy it. Now the challenge becomes how quickly can you find these customers, put them into your sales pipeline, sell them the stuff, and extract revenue from that process. That's the sales channel and marketing challenge. There's also the production, operations, and distribution challenge. When you're talking specifically about AI, scaling is not that difficult. If you're building a more classic product, let's say you're building and selling some sort of widget or gadget, that becomes a huge challenge. How do I get my injection molding to build X number of units a year? How do I scale up all the different distribution channels so once I build them in this factory, I can get them out of this one warehouse and into people's hands or on the store shelves, that sort of thing. And how do you set prices is another big question. Your initial couple of customers, you can generally set very bad prices and still get someone. But if you want to capture the majority, a good share of the market, you then have to be very careful about setting your prices. Once you hit the next step up is growth. I can pick one product line, I can grow that, I can sell a bunch of that consistently, great. I want to sell more different products now. I want to insure myself against getting knocked down by a competitor who shows up with the same thing at 20% cheaper and just kills me off, stone dead. I have all this knowledge about this market, let me exploit that in some way by building out more related products, either expanding into different countries, different areas, different sector, business sector, something. And finally, maturity. Once you reach maturity as a company, you need to defend your position. You need to make sure you don't, as a large company, get too inefficient. You have to defend yourself against larger players that might also have their eye on the same market as you with deep pockets to fight you, or against tiny little companies that come in with a new idea and that disrupt the market and kick you out by replacing your business entirely. And finally, you're doing all this while shareholders are breathing down your neck, saying, I want my returns, I want this, the values this year, I want the stock price this year to keep going up, I want this, I want this, I want this. And you do all of those long-term planning things, while at the same time providing enough value to your shareholders now that they're not going to kick you out and put someone else in who can promise better value in the short term. Yes.
Yes, I have a question. So if you go back to
Oh,
the
yeah.
yeah, so when you talked about going to markets, I'm reminded of AI startups or rather AI companies where they pursue two different strategies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, OpenAI and Anthropic, like the big walled garden.
Yeah.
DeepSeek and I guess Meta have more
Open
an
source.
open source approach.
Yes.
So when it comes to, so obviously if you're a startup, you want to, you know, at some point if you reach market saturation, yes, you want to give a bit, but then you have to worry about, so from the perspective of a regulator or social planner, in the first instance, why not, what are the benefits of open source, what are the limitations, and you know, if open source works, why do we invest in your startup?
Oh, okay, that's a fantastic question. I have, I think, a 45-minute lecture on this topic. So it's quite a deep, detailed discussion. But broadly speaking, the reason you want open source is because it provides you a kind of, on one hand, a sword, on one hand, a shield. If you have an open source solution, you have the ability to, particularly with good licensing, you can make it so that everyone else can use it for free. So that prevents other people from jumping in, but only you can provide certain features or support for it. And that gives you the right to build a semi-walled garden where you're giving away part of it for free in exchange for protection from the rest. And because nothing quite beats the price point of free, you're making it harder for new entrants to come in the market and build a fully paid solution. So the example for this is Red Hat Linux. They've done this extremely well for a very long time. If you want, it's a distribution of Linux that's given away as free. It's called Fedora, and when kept privately, it's called Red Hat. If you deploy Red Hat Linux in an enterprise setting, you can get the software itself for free, but you pay for technical support. And that's how Red Hat, for example, uses open source as its shield. You can also use it in some senses as a sword, where you have a particular opponent, let's say a particular kind of frame. The programming languages used to do this, right? So back in the day, you'd pay for a Borland C++ compiler. You pay them $80 a year or something. In exchange for that, you get to use their compiler. Well, there's no reason for a company like Microsoft came along and said, why should this company even exist? We can take over the business entirely. Made their own compiler. Made their own competitor to this, gave it away not as open source, but for free, and essentially killed off their entire market segment of paid compilers in one fell swoop. So in that sense, you can also use it as an aggressive maneuver to kick out companies you don't want on your turf. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Well, what are the implications for you as a startup?
Oh God. So as a startup, frankly, don't worry about open source. The danger with, or the risk with open source as a startup is that you are at a resource disadvantage compared to any even mid-sized player. Absolutely consider making your product open source, but consider doing that later on down the line. Or if there's a specific market reality that you deal with, like a trust issue. For example, you're trying to deploy certain code that runs in certain secure settings, then you have to make that open source so that people can audit the code for themselves. So absent those very specific situations, don't bother with open source as a startup company. Do think about it and put it on your roadmap if you need to, but for the first starting bit, don't worry about it. That's my advice. Okay, let's take a 3-minute break for questions. A little intermission for questions. Yep.
The generally funding environment in Singapore, I feel like in Europe, you hear a lot about like late stage funding is basically non-existent, so Series B or C onwards, basically everything goes to American VCs. What's it like in Singapore?
The short answer is I don't actually know. I've not grown a company to stage B or C yet. So I'll find out soon enough, I think. The more realistic answer is Singapore is a small market, right? That's the danger. So if you're going to get a VC in Singapore, or try to get that level of funding in Singapore, it's almost always going to come with the expectation that you are already in at least one or two other markets. And so you'll get a VC who has the cross-border experience. One of the other things that VCs will do is they'll very often provide you some sort of strategic, either partnership or strategic knowledge to help you with that scaling. And that's how they can help bring in their secret sauce to improve your overall business. So one of the strategies that we've seen, and that one of the things we are hopefully considering for the future, is finding a VC who has cross-border experience in, for example, the US, China, India, somewhere, and engaging with them so that they can help us with their distribution networks, their partnerships, all those things.
But is the first expansion market usually in Southeast Asia, or do you go straight to the US? It depends on the ego of the founder, I guess.
It depends. It depends, frankly, on a lot of things. The
Yeah.
specific product makes a huge difference, right? So my experience right now is in the medical sector. I will tell you that workflow differences between the countries are so massive that what product can be a fantastically viable product in, for example, the US, will not work at all in China for workflow reasons, or vice versa, even though it's the same product, solving the same problem. So part of the startup expansion is finding and fostering these right partnerships so that you know more about the market you're going into. You don't just build a product, show up at the market and realize, oh, no one's actually going to buy this for crappy structural reasons. The product's fine, no one has the incentive to buy it.
Yeah, and in Southeast Asia in particular, market access is a big problem, although I'm not the relevant expert on the matter.
I actually agree with what Gaurav said. I'm actually a senior advisor at a private equity fund here. We don't see, and the fund is a relatively small fund. For Singapore, it's medium sized, but going over 20 million US is very, very rare here. There's probably only a couple of funds here in Singapore that go into the 300 to 500 million, but in general, it's going to be really small. And like Gaurav said, and also the professor said, my viewpoint is go for the biggest market you can to get the best valuations you can. Remember, it's going to be based upon the market size, future revenue, etc. If you put your foot with a great technology out too soon, and you go for too small of a market, you're actually limiting yourself. It's an artificial problem you're making for yourself.
Fantastic answer. All right, we all taken a break, all rejuvenated. This is my favorite Bill Gates quote, right? Success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose. So now we're going to talk about a series of failures and how you can hopefully not fail like these people did. So at the very beginning, there's an idea. And the question you ask yourself is the problem I'm solving actually worth solving? Does the idea solve the problem at all? Let me introduce to you a product that somehow made it out, failing this idea completely. Has anyone heard of the Juicero? This was all the rage. It's one of the greatest excesses of Silicon Valley back in the day. So it is a machine that presses pre-made juices out of Mylar packaging. So you get this little cubed up fruit in a little foil packet. You put it in the device, you press a button, and it squeezes it out into a cup. They sold the machine for $400 US and a juice pack for $5 to $7. For comparison, I can walk into a Walmart, buy a blender for about $10 and a packet of fruit for about $2. And I can do exactly the same thing. And my frozen fruit that I buy will not have a little QR code on it that says, don't squeeze this if it's beyond a certain date. I can squeeze it whenever I want to, right? There's no machine is going to stop me from doing that. How did this product exist? And more importantly, how did they raise $120 million for this product? I want to just emphasize the magnitude of this failure. Somebody came up with a product that solves a non-existent problem, solves it more expensively and significantly worse than anything that's available on the market at the time, and $120 million was raised by them from Silicon Valley somehow. The real failure on this part, frankly, between us, is not the company itself, it's the people who invested $120 million in the company and went on to lose all of it. what's funny, you can look this up later. There's a video on YouTube that killed this company stone dead. Is that of a person using their hands to squeeze out the juice from a pack manually, and that's what killed this company stone dead. So to understand why they can raise so much money, we have to talk about how investors think. Investors go to a bunch of limited partners, as they're called, and they raise funds from them. They have to compete with a bunch of other investment funds in promising returns to the people they raise money from. Right? So you're an investment fund. You go to institutional investors, pension funds, insurance companies, anyone who has a large bundle of cash. You raise a bunch of money from them. In exchange, you promise them over 7 years, I will give you X percentage. For example, to make the math easy, 7% a year over 7 years. So I'll roughly give you 50% of your money extra on top of what you gave me. Great. So once you have all of these, once you have a bundle of money, you then have to go and invest in a series of either startups or companies in order to make that back. The principal goes from these high net worth individuals towards all the way to the startup, and the returns come back. And the investment fund makes money between these two by having access to better quality startups with better returns, and by structuring their investment in a way to give themselves better returns over time. Importantly, all this is a very significantly time-boxed process. From the time an investor raises an investment fund, the fund is complete, all the monies have been paid into it, they have typically 5 to 7 years to return the principal plus interest. And this means investors are under a tremendous amount of time pressure to choose. Every investor, so imagine like the example we went with already, 7 years, 7%. So over roughly 7 years, you give back, for every dollar you borrow, you have to give back $1.50. Now there's only 5 years left. You haven't put the money in a startup yet. You haven't invested some money in a startup yet. Now you have to find a startup with a 10% return to give you back your $1.50 from your dollar. So notice how the pressure keeps mounting. The longer they wait to make an investment, the higher the return they need to make for the fund to return a profit. So investors exploit information asymmetries between each other. The rule of thumb is that if an investor can better forecast the future value of a startup, they can make better decisions now, and that gives them the money it gives them the return they expect. The other thing is you can actually de-risk key risks of investments to increase value. So there's a new kind of investor we've seen in the last 10, 15 years, where a bit like Y Combinator, where you show up, you don't just get a check. You get access to a series of internal utilities, tools. You want to build something, there's a machine shop to build it in. You want to write some software, they have in-house programmers and in-house server admins to run your code, to write your code and to deploy it for you. And this is how they're removing key risks from the investment to help increase their value. Of course, this only applies at specific stages. And what we find also that investors heavily specialize in a particular stage of the startup. And depending on the stage they're specializing in, they have a different risk tolerance, they have a different fund size, and they have different stage-specific knowledge. Typically, an investor who is a seed stage investor will join your company as a seed stage investor and then sell on the bulk or almost all of their share to the next investor stage. That next investor will buy from this investor and sell on to the investor after that. And so by handing this over from investor to investor is how they make their money. It's very rare for an investor to buy and hold and just sit on it for the life of the company. Yes?
So does that mean that there's like investors who are kind of like specialized in a certain level of startup?
Yes.
Like some investors that only invest in like seed level.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And in fact, that's how it's always done that way.
Okay.
There will be investors specialized in seed startups in a particular industry, in a particular country. And yeah, so if you want to go to a different country, you have to find a completely different investor. Or they may have some relationships, but you have to find a completely different company that handles that typically. Yep?
The last point you made that they sell on every stage doesn't really quite make sense to me. I mean, maybe it's different in Singapore. Right, from all the European VCs have been to approaches. They all Camden, Ventures, I don't know if you know some of those names, but they are all pre-seed, seed focused, but they all hold their position to the IPO ideally.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
And they don't, like, they participate, not dilute themselves.
Okay. It's not unusual for a seed stage particular investor to hold a tiny percentage of your company until IPO, but it's almost, as far as I understand, never the case that they will hold on the entire 10% or whatever that they have of your company until IPO, because it doesn't work for the economics. They have to be able to liquidate that get money out of that to return to their own investors.
Yeah.
If you're talking about angels, that might be a different matter.
Angels take it earlier, I feel.
Is
From
it?
what I've heard.
So my impression is the other way around.
Okay.
So, but I should also mention I'm not familiar. I'm familiar with the American way of doing this. I'm familiar with the Singaporean way of doing this. I'm not very familiar with the European way of doing this.
Maybe so.
So I should mention again the same way that investors specialize in market segments and stages. You'll find that startups also have different levels of experience. Right? So I, for example, can't comment at all on Series A and B, raising Series A and B funds. I know only the theory behind that. I can tell you about the other parts. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know a particular angel in Singapore that actually has about 33 investments, average about 100,000 US each. He invests, and particularly with one focus to get to the next stage, and then he actually helps the founders to try to move his equity onto somebody else. So I mean, his philosophy is a little bit different, but he's just looking at the returns from a certain time frame, and it's a shorter time frame.
Thank you. Okay, so now notice that we've entered this very bizarre world where investors are not trying to optimize for eventual success, they just want to sell on to the next guy. The expectation is that as you get later and later, they'll get closer and closer to what the market actually wants. But that doesn't always have to be the case. And this makes investors incredibly prone to fads. So you'll see this kind of thing happen, particularly when NFTs were a thing, when blockchain was a thing. You saw a bunch of investors putting money into some startups that were, I hate to say it, vaporware. There's no product that exists or that's substantially useful. And I think Juicero is an example of one of these. What makes an investor's decision difficult and hides some of what's obvious in retrospect from them is that the decisions they make on a daily basis are anyway uncertain. They both have the kind of uncertainty that you can spend more time to learn your way through. Things that exist, that is true answer in the world, and you can go and find that answer. For example, does this hospital in this sector perform this kind of surgery? You can go and find an answer to that out. Find out the answer to that. But there's also irreducible uncertainty in the world. Things that you have no way of knowing. Or the classic example of this is how valuable is your early stage company? They vary until before you're making any sort of revenue, your valuation will vary considerably all over the place. And it's even possible there's no singular true value because it could depend on market conditions that don't exist yet. Or the value of this company is based on a certain forecast. The trade-off is that early stage investors, to deal with this uncertainty, they have adopted a policy of absurd risk tolerance. They will take on insane levels of risk. Again, Juicero is a fantastic example of this. The rule of thumb, particularly in a software as a service or AI company, is that they will invest in 100 companies, expect only about 10 to break even, 89 of them to fail, 10 to break even, and one company to make enough money to offset all the other failures they've seen. This makes them only interested in high risk, high return. So you could go to one of these VCs, you could tell them, look, I want to open my coffee shop in the airport, I'm going to make 4% per year return for the next 25 years. They won't even talk to you. They have no interest in that. Even though it is a good business, even though it will give you some sort of return on investment for a very long time, they won't even talk to you. They don't care about that. They'd much rather you open some kind of a labubu shop or something where they can have huge returns in the short term, and they're willing to risk your company just folding into nothing after a short while in exchange for that return. Okay, here we go. So the absolute poster child for high risk, high return is the Facebook early investor named Peter Thiel, who made $1.1 billion off of a $500,000 investment. That's a fantastic return. That's a 2,000 times return. It's also worth mentioning that Asian investors are not quite so extreme culturally. They're still pretty extreme compared to everyone else, but they're not quite as the 100 to 1 ratio. A better number would be what, 20 to 1?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have something to add on to that.
Yeah, sure.
Last week we were teaching a class, one of my classmates from undergrad, he actually founded a company that became pretty big. It's called Yelp.com. It was really big in the US. So he has his own fund right now in the Silicon Valley. And after the class, I'm talking to him and I said, you know, he was explaining to the class how he's comfortable with this. I mean, at 1 out of 5, 1 out of 7, you know, whatever failure rate, he's totally comfortable. Then I asked him after the class, I said, are you really that comfortable with like failing? And he said, yeah. He goes, and I'll tell you the secret. He said, we invest. He goes, I just look at the guy. I don't look at the business. And most of the times the guy is going to repurpose the business anyways. So if I give him that money, it's because I know he's going to actually, if things don't work out, he's going to do something else. So he goes, I'm comfortable. And I was like, wow, you know, he has a lot more courage than I did.
So the other big asymmetry that investors will exploit is that they know the market better than you do. Like we already talked about this earlier, how an investor gets pitches from all kinds of companies similar and different to yours. So they know the inside bits of every one of or most of these companies out in the market, and you don't. But you know your business better than they can. So if you're about to make an investment or receive some investment from someone, they will go through a process called due diligence where they will look into your business in quite a lot of detail, in pretty much forensic levels of detail, to figure out what claims you're making, if they're true, and if it can scale. This is especially true for later stage, much larger businesses. And there have been quite a few deals that get scuttled at this stage because the CEO is promising something doesn't quite match reality, or not close enough for the investor's comfort. Okay, let's talk about another stage later on, where customer discovery. Webvan is the poster child of the 1999 or the 2001 bubble. They were founded in 1999. They raised more than $500 million, and then they proceeded to go bankrupt. Anyone like to guess why a high-tech grocery company in the 90s would go bankrupt? Or to ask the same question another way, when did Red Mart start offering delivery in Singapore? Like about 5 years ago? Yeah. Anyone like to guess why in 1999 a grocery delivery company would go bankrupt? Sure.
They weren't profitable?
Well, yes.
Yeah,
but
they were way too
yes.
ready, like the logistic network, etc. just weren't put up and they couldn't do it.
So the logistics networks is a good answer. It turns out they spent way too much on automation, and they were burning more than $1 million a day on automation alone, and that led to them folding early. But really the customers weren't there. People didn't even trust, like eBay was barely a thing at this point. People didn't trust the internet to just buy groceries in the way they do now. Right now everyone uses the internet to buy groceries. Back in the day, people were suspicious of the internet, and so they just didn't have the customer base to support the kind of logistics network they were building out. So let's talk a bit more about customer discovery. This is particularly important for this distinction when you start selling to businesses. The notion of capital and operational expense. Would someone give me an example of a capital and operational expense somewhere? Give me an example. What counts as what's the difference really? Okay, never mind. Just a minute. So CapEx is essentially a durable asset that's good for multiple accounting periods, like a laptop. You buy it once, you use it for potentially several years. And operational expense is spent immediately, like a pair of gloves that you buy in a hospital. You buy a box of gloves, you'll use them up in a couple of days, and then that's it. It's all gone. So when you make a sale, when you make a business-to-business sale, you have to go inside a company, and you have to figure out how you're going to sell your product. Is it going to be a form of capital? Is it going to be a form of operational expense? And how is this going to be related to the client profit, that you're helping the client make more profit? Are you going to lower their cost? Are you going to increase their revenue in some manner? So this is an example of an approval threshold. I'll tell you, this is very, very common dirty trick that people use in the industry. I've done it myself, where you call up someone in a company and you say, hey, just wondering, at your level, what's the maximum amount you can sign for? And you set your price just very slightly below that. For the cost, I've done that before, right? For a cost of like $3 of coffee, you can easily bump your price by twice or more. And you can vary that price on a company by company basis if you're willing to go and have this coffee with people. So that's a strategy that people use before. So the reason I'm introducing this to you now is because of this fantastic book. I met this guy once, Raju Bhupati Raju. He actually gave a seminar on sales. Be careful, if you ever meet him, he will sell you your own shoes back to you. He is that good at sales. And he's pointed out that every sale you make has a money. There's someone who has the money in the company, someone who has the authority to make a purchase, and someone who has the need for the purchase. And the existence of the company hierarchy is designed to divide up these three roles across different people. So when you sell the same product, you have to sell it to the person with the money, the person with the authority, the person with the need separately. So let's give you a fantastic example of this, right? Let's say there's checkout candy. Who needs the checkout candy? There's a mom and a child who are out in the supermarket, and there's candy next to the checkout, and you're standing there, and the child's looking at the candy. And the need, of course, is by the child. The child just wants the candy. Candy, 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 candy. Okay, great. Who has the money in this case? Yep. Oh, no, I thought you put your hand up. Yeah, the parent. The mom or the dad in this case. And it's a consumed, so it's technically an operational expense. And it's cheap and convenient, and I can use it as a bribe to keep my kid quiet. And the authority, of course, is with the mom as well. So when you sell the candy to the kid, it's candy. Of course you want candy. You sell the candy to mom. You can use this to bribe your kid to stay quiet while you go and do your grocery shop for the week. You see the distinction, right? How I'm selling the same candy to two different people at different levels. Let's do this for an actual, more concrete example. I have this new product. I'm trying to track brain tumor boundaries. I'm selling it for this amount of money. And the hospital neurosurgery department has said, I want this. Who has the need? Someone who hasn't spoken before, if ideally. Yes, go for it.
What do you think of patients?
That's a good answer. But really what the patients want is they want their tumor removed. If you could wave a magic wand and do that, they would.
Doctor?
Exactly. The doctor is the one who has looked at the problem and said, this product will help me solve this particular problem well. So the neurosurgeons and their teams will say, with this product, I can do my job of removing the tumor, and I can remove some of the problems associated with my job. Like the complication rate, prevent the person from having to come back to the OT later on. All those things count against me in my KPIs. So this is how you sell this to a neurosurgeon. That's great, right? That's the first stage. So who in this case has the money? Okay, go for it.
The hospital?
Yeah.
The administrators?
Correct. So in this case, if it's about 350K, if you remember the table I showed you of the approval thresholds, roughly the CFO will have to approve this. Depends, of course, very strongly on hospital and by country. So when you sell this to the CFO, you have to say, hey, you're wasting X amount of money every month on surgeries that you will come back and redo because you missed a bit. You buy this, you don't have to worry about that anymore. You'll save so much money in that, in the long run for that. And the authority for this would be the chief of neurosurgery or the presiding doctor responsible for neurosurgery in the hospital. And you can sell this to them in a bunch of different ways. Like, oh, you'll get better performance, you can use this as a marketing tool for some really good for fancy tools. Or your department doesn't have this tool, everyone else does, why are you lagging behind so much? Or hey, you could even be a thought leader in this area. I love the phrase thought leader because there was a time before most countries banned this, where pharmaceutical reps would pay doctors a large amount of money to be a thought leader and give talks at conferences about their particular drug. It's a very, very interesting marketing tactic. Let's give you another example, right? Database software. Again, the thing to note, right, the point I'm trying to drive home is that you're selling the same product in 3 or more different ways, depending on whom you're talking to. And you have to get not just one person, every person on this list on board with you, or on board with the purchase before it goes through. So for example, you need some database software that has better disaster recovery. The software developer will look at this and say, yeah, sure, I want this. It means I don't have to write disaster recovery code. It's going to save me X amount of sprints or this many months of work. Great. The money, excuse me. Sorry, just give me a moment. All right. I did realize that USB was in charge of the device. All right. The operational expense is approved by the division head, who basically says, I'm responsible if there's a disaster. How am I going to offset this? I can just pay this software and I'll avoid me a bunch of costs and risk in the future. And in this case, the authority also resides with the same person that basically says, if there's some kind of a disaster, my department won't be the one holding up the whole company's revenue stream. So you notice how you're selling this in a potentially adversarial manner to different people within the same company. So when it comes to sales, you have to do this kind of twisted thinking quite often. You look at a company, look at the internal structure within the company, see what incentives each person has and sell it to them separately. And you always have to sell it to more than one person, typically many, many more than one person. So there's a chart that's very popular called Moore's technology adoption. We're going to skip over it largely, but because there's a book that I'll be recommending that covers this. But essentially the theory behind this is that when you start a new kind of business using a new kind of technology, there is an adoption gap in between. And navigating this risk of the adoption gap is one of the key steps you'll have to take in the formation of in scaling your company. The other thing that this chart implies is that if you let somebody else take this risk, you can make a very profitable business by being the second or third in a market. So for details on this, I would recommend this book. It's called Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore, which he goes into this in detail with a lot of case studies.
Sorry,
Yes.
we go to the previous slide.
Okay.
If if someone were to only start adopting ChatGPT or large language models today, where would they be on that curve?
Oh, okay. Give me 1 second. Let's see if I can do this. Oh no, so because I'm recording, I can't do that. Unfortunately.
Okay.
It's a shame. Okay, so if they were to adopt ChatGPT, for what purpose is the next question? For internal business efficiency reasons?
Yes.
Sure. There'd be somebody at the top. It's not the stage where like mom and pop shops are using this. So it's not at the far right of the curve. It's also, I suspect that for things like email drafting, we're at the very top of the curve, or simple customer-facing users, we are the earlier at the top of the curve. But for a bunch of use cases, we're not even at the start yet, like generative 3D design, or like sales chatbots are further to the right, generative design is to the left, simple media things are to the right, more complicated, customized news or whatnot is to the left, that sort of a thing. Okay, great. Now this is the big one for maturity. Once you're a big company, what are your considerations? So this is actually, frankly, going to be, if you hope to be in a large company somewhere, in any sort of leadership position, these are the questions that people are going to ask you. First of all, the most important thing to know, what is CAGR? Anyone else from this side? Come on, something very quiet. CAGR.
Continuous annual growth.
Yes, yeah, you're right. It's called compound annual growth rate. The idea behind it is that if you are a mature company in a mature industry, so there's no startups, no one scaling rapidly, there's a bunch of big companies duking it out with each other, you are all collectively satisfying the total demand that exists for your product in the market at this point in time. If you want to generate more value, you can only do this two ways. Either you can make the market bigger and capture part of what you've made, or how to scale the market, by making more products, more differentiated products, something like that. Or you can take business away from someone else by making a better product or offering it at a better price, broadly speaking. If you're a mature company, there's two mature companies in an industry, they have only two options. Either B can cannibalize part of A's market, or the B can scale itself and scale the market as a whole. So the way to think about it is not these companies are peacefully coexisting. No, they're locked in an eternal arms race with each other. Both of them are trying desperately to cannibalize each other's markets, if nothing else, just so they themselves are not cannibalized by someone else. Constantly locked in this eternal arms race just to maximize their value. And the way that they judge how well they're doing in this arms race is by comparing their internal growth rates to the growth rate of the industry as a whole. This is why there's this constant, unending focus on CAGR. Why? The danger of being a big company is that you can get disrupted. This happens a lot. A lot of these big companies have a smaller company that's a completely unknown new entrant into the market, just step in, build a technologically different solution or significantly either better, more specific, or more general solution that just wipes them on the floor. The poster child for this is CompuServe and Yahoo, where in the beginning there was AOL, America Online, which had their own little search engine and it was absolute junk. So Yahoo steps in and wipes the floor with them in like 5 years or something. Yahoo in turn grows to be this huge conglomerate and gets wiped by Google. I think famously Yahoo had the chance to purchase Google for, I think, like in the single-digit billions of dollars at one point, and they passed thinking, yeah, it's not a big deal. And then they proceeded to get eclipsed by Google. Now Google in turn is now slowly losing market share or they were losing market share to OpenAI for a while, but now it's sort of stabilized. Now we're trying to see the big language models duking it out with each other. So this is the reason that mature companies invest so much in R&D and mergers and acquisition. R&D is to build in-house the next disruption technology so they can maintain their market position or seize it from others. And mergers and acquisition so that if they see a small company early on where it's still cheap enough, they can step in, buy out their company, and now no longer have to worry about them as a competitor. Instead, use them as leverage against their competitors. All right. Fantastic. Whew. Wow, we're about an hour into our lecture. Let's take a little longer 5-minute break. Is that all right? Perfect. Let's take a 5-minute break. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take it.
Okay, we'll be back at 9:46.
All right, everyone. I hope you had a good break. So, thank you so much for not running away screaming during the break. So AI is my personal specialist subject, right? I have a PhD in AI. I've been trained in this for a very long time. The most exciting thing, I think, about AI is just how much it's amplifying the existing human ability. In fact, that's pretty much what AI is, right? It's a constructed system that mimics the ability of human intelligence. And there's a bunch of different ways to construct it. One of the ways of building an AI is using something called machine learning, which is where you don't construct it yourself out of Lego bricks, but you train it from data. And neural networks are one way of training machines from data. So this is getting more and more specific. Software as a service is a business model typically associated with AI, in which you build out the product and you give people access to it for a monthly or yearly subscription, pretty much. Importantly, AI is much more than just machine learning and is much more than just neural networks. This is a rough taxonomy or breakdown of how AI looks like, based on its study in universities, not based on how it's actually constructed. So, for example, robotics motion planning is rarely done almost never done by machine learning in industry. It's almost always done by having physics models and simulating those with a solver model. On the other hand, computer vision is almost always done by neural networks nowadays. So the big stars of the show today are supervised learning, which is when you have a bunch of data with labels, large language models, everyone knows ChatGPT, big data, where you have a bunch of data that's all different types, pictures, text, how long someone spent looking at a particular post on Instagram, all those different pieces of large, heterogeneous, diverse sets of information. And then the last star, unsung hero, is integer programming, which is completely different from all of these, and its job is to optimize supply chain problems. And it does it extremely well. So if you want to know, UPS wants to know, should this package go on which of these 8 different trucks, to which of these 8 different intermediate stations, that's how they solve the problem. Okay. So when we deploy AI, so now we know what AI is, right? So when you're in a company and you want to deploy AI in some manner, you have 3 basic strategies on how to deploy it. You can deploy AI internally, where your own employees use it, but not the customers. This is where AI drives cost savings and all that hype comes from. And the way it drives these cost savings is by improving your efficiency through automation. There's a repetitive task with some variation that the AI can handle naturally. Orchestration, where there's a big complicated task that the AI can help break down into smaller tasks that are individually fulfilled by either humans or AI. Knowledge base, where there's a large amount of text written by people within the company on how to build certain products, how to use certain products. And this large base of information is difficult to search and index through. And so you use AI to help assist a human in providing them the appropriate information they need at the point where they need it. It's also very good for inspection efficiency. This is actually AI for inspection, where a job is done and now you can examine it in an automated manner to check it was done to the required standard. This has been done, for example, by fruit farmers for almost 30 years, just by measuring the color of fruit as it passes over a conveyor. You can just kick off the ones that are not ripe yet, stuff like that. And AI for paperwork, efficient completion of paperwork, particularly in highly regulated industries, is very popular as well. This is the AI for efficiency increase. The second use of it, which is not quite so, let's say it hasn't quite captured the public's imagination yet, is AI for forecasting. This is when you, at a strategic level in a company, need to figure out how many of these units we need to build for the next quarter, for the next production cycle. What's the cost between producing now versus producing later, the stocking versus the product depreciation? How do I manage all of this? You can use AI to help forecast and get better numbers and use those numbers to inform your existing planning and production processes. So internal facing AI, there's also product facing AI, where your AI forms either the core or a value add part of your product. In this case, if it's an integral part of your product, for example, AI satisfies its core function in a way you cannot replace. So the example for this I've seen is a medical chatbot, where the entire user interaction is driven by the AI, and there's no way to build the same product without having the AI inside of it. What's happening very popularly in the world today is value add features, where you have a product that does not itself rely on AI, but you use AI to make things easier for it. Photoshop, content aware fill. You've seen this, right? You take a picture of someone, you remove all the background, all the dogs jumping around behind them, whatever. This is fantastic. PowerPoint does this for some design-related stuff. You put up a slide, and it gives you a series of design suggestions, how to arrange things. Canva made a bundle of money off of this. Autodesk Fusion is a 3D design software. You can tell it, I want this part to connect to this part. I want this much weight to be supported. Find me a design. It will just construct a design for you. A very organic, alien-looking design, but a design nonetheless. And finally, customer-facing, where it's not in the product, but it is used to deal with customers. Classic example, chatbot. I don't want to pay so much for tier 1 support. I'm going to add a tier 0 AI to triage and deal with like 30% of all the problems for essentially free. That's the mindset that goes into this. Chatbots offer that, support offers that. Personalization and advertising is a big deal. Simple things like when you log in, it's going to show you a synthetic image of your dog dancing in the background. I think Apple famously does this. If you have to take a picture of an animal on your lock screen, it'll show the time with the animal superimposed on top of it. That's a very simple deployment of AI for personalization. Importantly, it's not a key or core part of the product. It's just a nice thing to have that's customer facing. The big use case now I'm seeing in industry is customer relationship management, where you have potentially giant sales teams with tens of thousands of leads, and they can use CRM software, can do things like qualify leads, figure out if this person might ever buy from you, using either an automated email, launch email campaigns, help you figure out based on, for example, your user interacting with your website, how likely are they to actually complete a purchase they put in their cart, all this sort of thing. Again, not part of the product, part of your interaction with the customer. Okay, so now that we know how we're going to deploy AI, I'm going to explain to you with as little math as possible. Don't worry, there's no math involved. There's a limited amount of math involved in this lecture. What a neural network is. Again, recall, artificial intelligence is a big category within which is machine learning, within which there's neural networks. And even within this is all the specialist stable diffusion, the image generator AI, the LLMs, all the other special cases of this. So in the most general case, what a neural network is it takes in some sort of input and it produces some sort of output in a manner that depends on the output, of which depends on the input and the parameters. Importantly, you must have some way to coerce the input, whatever it is, into some sort of number, in some series of numbers. You can do this in as dumb or trivial a manner as you like. So an image will literally be the color of each pixel as a number, as a long list of numbers, potentially thousands or hundreds of thousands of numbers, is how you typically encode an image if you want to know whether what's being shown in this image. So you encode this as a number, it does some math on it and produces an output at the end that's also encoded as a number. And you have to have some way to coerce the output from a number into whatever you actually want, or a class label or something. The strategy is that once you have a number in, once you have your input as a series of numbers, you mix them with a series of parameters in a way that the output depends on both, and repeat and repeat and do this many, many times potentially. The math, yeah. The neural network research, the stuff I spent almost 7 years of my life doing, is about designing better quality math with all the appropriate numerical properties so it can be used for this process. Importantly, the network structure is pre-designed by a human and fixed. The parameters are initialized randomly, and then you iteratively discover the correct value of the parameters from data. The rule of thumb is that for every image sample you have, you will present it to this network 100 times, and each time you present it, it'll go forward, it'll calculate what the error is, push it backwards, and tweak all the parameters by a tiny amount, like 1 part in a million, 1 part in 10,000. Just tweak them just a little bit, so it fails a little bit less on that example, and it repeats it again and again and again. Each parameter times each example you show it, times a couple of hundred times. This leads to something like more than a quadrillion mathematical operations. So when you apply this in, it's more than quadrillion mathematical operations in total. The parameters themselves are opaque. It's difficult or impossible to look at the parameters of a network and extract something useful just by inspecting them. You have to typically do something more involved to do that. Yes?
This is generically for neural networks. There are ways of encoding.
Yes.
Yeah, there are other models that you can use that are a bit more interpretable.
That's true, yes. You can design this to be interpretable, but it's typically comes at a cost of accuracy or efficiency. Okay. So note that we've talked so far about how the math is done many, many times, how you present each example is presented to the network, and leads to a small change in the parameter. And you do this potentially quadrillions of times. This is why these models are so incredibly expensive to train. So these numbers are all on the table, are all approximate. Because these are internal cost conditions of these companies, and no one wants to reveal this. So this is our best guess at what the numbers are. You can see that GPT-4o from last year cost roughly $78 million to train. Gemini Ultra cost roughly $191 million to train. That's a lot of money. And it's driven, this insane number is driven by the fact they use 1.5 trillion parameters, or 1.8 trillion parameters, and they presented billions to trillions of words. In fact, I read a paper by Google that basically said that they have exhausted every currently accessible piece of written work by humans in all of recorded history to train their model. And they didn't just show us the model once, they showed us the model hundreds of times to get it to perform the way that it does. So for large language models, they're called large for a reason. The price is insane, the model size is large, the price is training is very expensive. Even DeepSeek cost roughly $6 million for a single training, as was rumored back in the day. The actual number is a little bit higher, but we don't know exactly what it is. Even specialist models, so let's say general image models, like vision transformer, this is what you use if you want to recognize if a picture is a cat or a dog. For example, it costs about 50 grand to train. Specialist pathology models, which is what we are looking at for our work, We don't even know what the costs are, but the cost of the data alone, 1.7 million pairs, 200 million is slide images, will run you into the tens of millions of dollars easily, just to buy that data. If you can even find someone who's willing to sell you access to their old catalog.
Sorry,
Yeah.
what do pathology models do?
Oh, they take a, oh yeah, that's a good point. They take a picture of human tissue and they tell you if you've got cancer, if you have cancer, where the cancer is, what kind it is, what grade it is, what stage it is. That sort of thing. They can also diagnose other illnesses like diseases and whatnot. So the question is, okay, these are huge, crazy numbers. It's driven largely by the number of parameters and the amount of data that you need to train such a model. But that's not just the cost. It's not just the data times the parameters. There are all these other cost conditions you have to worry about as well. Particularly if you have a lot of data, gathering and warehousing the data is expensive. Uber had this problem when they did the self-driving car model. They had to have an entire team of people, not just to warehouse the data, but to design the tools to warehouse the data. So they had a team developing tools so that another team of literally hundreds of people could maintain the servers just so that they could keep the data flowing in their system. Annotations are expensive. We see this a lot in the medical sector, where an X-ray is cheap. You can just buy a bank of millions of X-rays without any diagnosis attached for cents per X-ray. But getting a pathologist, even one in India, which is relatively affordable, to look at and give you a diagnosis will cost you 50 cents to $1.50 per X-ray, depending on the experience and level of detail and certification. So if you want 1 million X-ray images, you can get the images for cheap. You want the images and the diagnosis, it's going to cost you, instead of 50K, it's going to cost you $1.5 million because you want the diagnosis attached to it. So annotations themselves can be expensive. Again, this is the problem that also Uber faced early on, which is how do you get a depth map? So from images of your car, how do you show that, yeah, this is actually a pedestrian, this is not a pedestrian, this is a car, it's not a car. That's expensive for them to do. GPUs themselves are expensive. So not only, you can rent, of course, but the renting is very expensive. At any sort of scale, you want to buy your own GPUs. GPUs are very capital intensive. Moderate size, a hobbyist GPU that you can buy and use for basic neural networks and playing games yourself will run you about $1,000. Professional grade GPU will run you in the $20,000 to $50,000 range. And it's only good for about 5 years. After that, the technology is outdated. That's how fast the technology is moving. So you're putting in a $50,000 asset, not once, but for server farms that run hundreds of thousands of these units. So it's a hugely capital intensive process. It's incredibly power hungry. You need to get specialist power systems to deliver. It's even more power hungry than a standard server farm. So you get specialist power considerations and specialist cooling considerations at the same time. Expertise is expensive to acquire, thankfully, for me at least. And tuning is the last big cost driver. You don't just train a model once. You need to have some assurance that the math and the parameters you've picked for this are good parameters. So you'll train this model and you'll train a neighborhood of similar models to check that you're not leaving some performance on the table you could otherwise be exploiting. Plus you're also trying to interactively discover the appropriate structure for your network. And all of those different decisions you make require you to train a model, at least, if not the full thing, at least a scaled down version of the model, many, many times to establish you've made a good decision that you're happy you can live with for the life of your company. So this means that you don't just train a model once. This model, this cost, sure, they pay it once, but they pay it once roughly every 4 to 6 months, again and again and again. And they pay maybe a tenth of this every month. So they can keep training smaller models and checking if their assumptions are right, making tweaks to the bigger models, that sort of a thing. So this is hugely expensive to train a large neural network yourself. This also implies that your trained AI models can be thought of as a kind of capital expenditure. Just like a machine, like a building, you can lease a machine, you can lease a building, you can also lease a neural network. And turns out what's happening nowadays, the most recent shift in the industry, is not to build your own giant neural networks from scratch, but to lease someone else's network and customize it to your use case. It turns out it's much cheaper to modify an existing trained NN neural network than it is to train one from scratch. These large neural networks are called foundation models because they serve as the foundation for other more refined models later on. And there's some examples of things you can do with them. Task adaptation is one of the greatest. So you can take a neural network, the general purpose network that costs $50,000 to train, and specialize it to identify the kind of pizza, for example. it was trained on buses and cars and cats and dogs and ostriches and whatnot, but you can get it to specialize on pizza for relatively much lower cost than training a new one from scratch would cost you. You can do things like distill it, take a high-performing large network, and pack it down to a much, much smaller size at the cost of some performance. This is commonly used for if you hold up your phone and you say the trigger word like, hey Alexa or hey Google or something like that. It uses a distilled down speech model only tuned to identify those couple of words on your phone, so it can do it with very low power consumption. And then that kicks off a much bigger model that will actually listen to what you say and extract the full word and semantics from that. You can also do things like tune the sensitivity and specificity. So if you're afraid of false positives, for example, when making a diagnosis, you want to lower your false positive, and you don't mind accidentally giving a false, you want to reduce your false negatives, and you don't mind having a slightly higher false positive rate, you can tune all of that after the fact in neural networks for much cheaper. So I'll give you an example of something we've published in a research paper that one of our research team did in the past for a foundation model trained on pathology data. We were able to adapt the input to suit our machine and build a custom final layer to serve our own specific task. And this initial model is 1.1 billion parameters and 500,000 images. It cost, my best guess is the training cost alone is in the $10,000 range. It costs us about $2 to customize it for a use case. And this is considered standard practice in industry now. You can do this. Take an off-the-shelf model that costs tens of thousands of dollars, and for cents on the dollar, customize it to your specific use case.
So,
yeah.
sure. When you say customize it,
Yes.
if I pluck a random student from this class,
Yes.
can they, and give them a week, can they do it? Or do they need to engage certain personnel and there's process knowledge encoded?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I would say any student taking a couple of classes in machine learning can do it. It's not a complicated process to do. It's a complicated process to do right, well, and reliably. That's the other pattern you'll see in a lot of machine learning. It's quite easy to do it, and so it works on a static data set in your that you get as part of your class notes or class project. But doing it in a way that maintains its reliability over time is going to be difficult. So what I'm going to be talking about today is the business side and the reliability side of this quite considerably. It's a very good way to motivate this part. Thank you. The other thing you can do that's commonly done now in large language models is you can augment them. Rather than just having a bunch of information that you've stuck in the model that it knows and you interact with that information that's in it, you can give it additional abilities. If you've heard of vibe coding, no? Yeah, okay. Vibe coding is when you interactively with a machine, you help it write, it helps you write code, and you give it access to various abilities of your coding platform, like getting error messages from the compiler, writing files, reading documentation on the internet. You can give it access to certain units of ability. The most common basic ability you'll have to give it is you have to give it a very good prompt. That's prompt engineering. That's when you give it a very clear, distinctive, and understandable prompt designed for a machine to ingest and produce responses with. This is a bit of an art. You'll have to do this in a few times to get your ChatGPT to give you the output you want. If you've ever played with ChatGPT, you know you'll be very specific with some things. That's what prompt engineering is. Now the other stuff you can add on top of your basic prompt engineering is stuff like retrieval augmented generation, which is when your large language model is given in addition to the prompt and the question or whatever variable text you have. There's also a lookup before it in some database for the relevant knowledge, and that also gets appended to that. So now your large language model doesn't have to remember where it's getting all the special data from. The data is already there, already available as part of the input stream. And because it's more available, it's easier for the machine learning model to produce that in the output as well, or extract the relevant facts from that for the output. Context injection is another thing. If you've ever used, again, ChatGPT is a poster child for this. If you log in with a Google account, it'll know your name. It'll like quietly slip your name into a conversation sometimes, and it freaked me out when it first did that. It turns out because they do very good context injection, they extract whatever they can out of you, and they inject that. In industry, what context injection would look like is you're browsing some company's website. You want to make a purchase. You're not sure about the purchase, a holiday, some high-value purchase, a holiday, piece of machinery or something, and chatbot that talks to you to help you make a purchase is told, hey, you've been looking at these two different options for 61 minutes and 37 minutes each. Maybe try to sell one of these to you. That sort of context injection is getting more and more common. Semi-structured output is also very useful. If you've seen a chatbot that can produce like buttons, like call to action buttons, say here, click here to book, that sort of a thing. So it can produce images as part of the output, it can produce buttons, it can do all kinds of strategic things. API and function calling is another thing, where the chatbot has the ability to reach out to an external API, send an email on your behalf, receive calendar information from your calendar on your behalf. Okay. Now the meta structure behind all of these is that of agentic AI. You must have heard this term before. What an agentic AI is an AI that does all of these things in a loop. It's not just that you provide your prompt and your question or the details of what the particular user has to the AI and get a single response. The AI instead has the right to call itself as part of an AI API or function call. So the AI can say, hey, I've solved this part of the problem so far. I want you to call myself to solve this sub-problem and this sub-problem. And then call myself again with the results to merge them together. And so an AI can potentially structure its own output interactively with itself. That's what the buzzword agentic means.
Sorry, can you give a concrete example of that?
Okay. Let's say you give an AI a code problem. This is the classic use case of agentic AI. You give it a piece of code and you say, I want you to tell me if this code works. If it works or fails, give me a set of test cases that validates whether it works or show me where it fails. A simple model will just read the text once, spit out one set of responses, and that'll be that. A better agentic model will take in the input, will say, hey, let's check if it works. I'm running it against a compiler. Okay, it compiles successfully. I will now use the fact it compiles successfully to make a set of some test cases. And then it'll call itself saying, hey, make test cases for this one function, make it to another function, another function. It'll merge these together and say, hey, make test cases for the whole system together. So it'll potentially call itself many, 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 many times to do this. Right? Another example of agentic AI would be, hey, can you get me invite Kwok Ha out for dinner to this restaurant on this day and this time? The agentic AI receives that instruction. It says, okay, I break down my task into subtasks interactively. The invite Kwok Ha out for dinner XYZ at this time and place involves making a booking at a restaurant, sending a calendar invitation, sending an email with a polite invitation, and confirming this in your own calendar. So it will break this big task down into subtasks and run each of those independently and potentially do things like set up a reminder. So hey, wake me up again another hour, wake the AI up in an hour to check if Kwok Ha has responded. If he has responded, then confirm it on my end as well. That sort of a thing. So agentic AI is essentially AI calling itself again and again and again in a semi-structured manner in a loop. It's a special case of the function calling. Okay, there are some additional things you should augment your LLMs with. Guardrails and model stacking are the two big things. So guardrails are this. There are no provable guarantees when it comes to LLMs, right? LLMs can do all kinds of stupid things that you don't expect. We'll be going to some very funny examples of that later on. You want there to be some sort of safety net. Imperfect as it is, you want there to be some sort of safety barrier that stops your LLM from doing something that's illegal, dangerous, or flat out wrong. Or for example, selling, I had this encounter recently. I bought a mouse from a website with an obviously LLM generated prompt, and it claimed to have a feature the mouse didn't have, claimed to be Bluetooth compatible, wasn't. And now that poor seller is going to deal with probably hundreds of returns from people who expected a Bluetooth mouse but didn't get a Bluetooth mouse. And a good set of guardrails would have saved them a bunch of money. This also happens especially in heavily regulated industries, is where guardrails are important. The classic example of medical chatbot is when you absolutely need fantastic guardrails because you can minor changes of phrasing can lead to vastly different implications. I don't have it on hand now, but I'll put it on the reading list. I'll put a paper from Brown University showing an example where an LLM can be easily made to say things to potential psychiatric patients that are not supposed to be said. Model stacking is another one, right? So LLMs, you've seen how expensive they are to train. They're also relatively expensive to use. You can expect per 1,000 tokens, $1 or less, about $1, maybe a bit more. For mid-tier models, and more expensive models will get more expensive over time. This is not the cost to you right now, it's the overall cost of deploying in industry. At that point, you want to use the cheapest model suitable for your current task. You don't want to be pulling out a Ferrari, you're just going down the road to get milk or something like that, right? You want to take a bicycle or something, whatever's cheap. So model stacking is another huge way to drive cost savings, where you use a simpler model, is given the ability to say, hey, this is outside of my expertise, or I cannot solve this in the allotted resources given, escalate. And you can then stack these models to have a super cheap model, or even a heuristic model below, that captures things like, oh, give me the product tracking number. All the way up to a mid-tier model to a very expensive model to handle your user queries. And you can save more than half of your AI cost by doing something like this intelligently. And then there's the really expensive parts. Right? These are the ones that you avoid unless you have a giant company that can take the kind of investment it takes to build this. Reinforcement learning from human feedback is the big strategy, where you'd have user input data being used to interactively tell the LLM to prioritize certain output versus other output. This is used to, when the LLM has a set of plausible outputs, to choose the one that is most appropriate for this use case. This is not expensive because of the training cost. The training cost a little bit. Most expensive because of the tooling cost. It costs a lot of time and effort to procure the kind of interactive data from people, as well as then to build up the infrastructure you need to actually train your LLM. Almost always, if instead of doing this for any company that's of a small to medium size, you'd want to just do retrieval augmented generation or semi-structured output to avoid having to do this. And you can mimic most of the effects. Fine-tuning is another use case. Fine-tuning will let you take your current LLM and make it better at one task at the expense of potentially making it worse at other tasks. This used to be the standard way to get data into LLMs for the first year or two, but it's been replaced mostly by retrieval augmented generation now. We find that it's better to have a general purpose model that's very good and give it specific data that it needs right now, rather than try to fine-tune information into it. Okay, let's take a 1 minute break. I'll take questions and then we'll talk about the business side of things. This is the exciting part. I think this is the part where you guys, that all these lectures been leading up to. Just a minute. I can take questions as well. Yeah.
Specifically for AI, do you think there's a skill over AI?
Oh yeah.
For example, like
Yeah, absolutely.
depends on the first movers to like really establish the foundation. So wouldn't companies just wait to see what others do first?
That's a fantastic point. Yes, there is a huge second mover advantage in AI, mainly because most of these people try don't work. Most things you try don't work. So you wait and you watch and you see someone finds a thing that does work, then you exploit that as much as humanly possible.
Then what motivates these first movers to come out and really set a foundation?
They're hoping to capture the bulk of the market share, right? So the story behind this is, if you are a first mover, you must be convinced that your idea is going to work better than anything else in the competition. And by being a first mover, you can seize as much of the market as possible. The second movers are waiting and watching to see which one of the first movers win. And they typically will lag behind the first mover for at least a while, until secondary concerns or business concerns or distribution problems end up helping one or the other win. Or maybe this give you a more concrete example of this. OpenAI releases ChatGPT. Huge cost to them, but they found a solution that works. In comparison, there are a bunch of other competitors that tried to build something similar that didn't work out. Because they got the first mover advantage in that, they are now worth much more than any of the other second movers. The trade-off, the second movers spend a lot less in R&D to figure out what approach works. Does that make sense? Yeah.
No, just more generally, this is how like the US and Singapore play different roles in the R&D chain. The US tends to be a first mover. Singapore says they would like to be a fast follower because we just don't have scale to make what the scale does.
Yeah, that's true, right? We have told a lot. If you're a first mover, we've told a lot of failure. A lot of failure before you hit something big. That's why second movers are popular place for me.
Should we continue?
Let's keep both of them to come back. I
Okay,
think
yeah,
this
we
is
can
relevant.
Yeah, wait for it.
I'm happy to take more questions. Yeah, go for it.
Regarding DeepSeek,
Yeah.
I don't know how much you know about the situation, so I don't want to, But, so what exactly would you say maybe help them as a second tool compared to...
Okay. So I can tell you what the technical thing they discovered, right? So these large language models have to maintain a relationship between all the different words in their input and output, saying, in order to produce this word, I am weighing the importance or the relevance of all these input words with respect to this one output word. So they maintain this giant matrix that's like 10,000 by 10 or 1 million by 1 million for the new million token context windows. Huge table they're maintaining that says for this input, this is the output. DeepSeek found a way to compress that in a way that's data driven and interactive, and that greatly reduces the cost of making this giant 1 million by 1 million matrix. They were able to factor down to something like 10,000 by 10,000. They also have access to cheaper power as well, and that helped them. The cost consideration of DeepSeek are very interesting, right? When they first came out, they claimed $6 million was their marginal cost of training. It doesn't quite seem to be accurate. It's a little more than that. But the thing is, we don't know, right? We have no idea. And certainly the cost of training it the way they did and the way you do it in the US or Singapore is also different. So it's an exciting place to be. All right. So now this is where we bring the whole lecture together. You've been equipped with an idea of what startups look like. You've been equipped with an idea of what AI is and how you deploy it in your company, whether it's internally or externally facing. Now let's see if we can deploy this in the startup situation. I'm going to begin with an apology. I'm introducing this to you, the concept of the MBA student disease, because the moment you go to industry, someone's going to say, hey man, have you heard of agentic AI? We gotta use agentic AI. You gotta use LLMs, you gotta use this, you gotta use that buzzword to deploy this. And this is very often a symptom of MBA student disease, an over broad look into thinking that all business is fundamentally the same, just done by slightly different window dressing. Really, businesses vary considerably based on your sector. They vary considerably based on where you do it. The same business will vary hugely based on the regime. Even minor jumping across minor borders in the EU will lead to huge changes in business law. Right? Don't try to make every decision by some sort of framework, and be very suspicious. The biggest, if you walk away from this class with one lesson, is this one. If you find a decision where all the domain experts and everybody else is obviously wrong, something more is happening, right? Be careful with it. There's a story I'll tell you at the end called Chesterton's Fence. That it's a parable that explains this very, very well. Be careful of buzzwords. Agentic AI is the new big AI buzzword. You don't want to be, if someone tells you use agentic AI, be careful. Ask them what the problem they're really trying to solve is. And if you can solve, you can almost always solve the problem with a much, much, much cheaper solution. Both easier for you to build and cheaper for you to deploy in the long term. The other big fear is that if you're going to be prioritizing quarter by quarter, you're going to not be able to make the kind of deep and long investments you need for AI to work well in a business. We'll be talking about data in a little bit, and you'll see that building and deploying AI in a business to maintain the kind of efficiency you need, it needs a relatively long time horizon of at least a couple of years to show the returns. R&D is not overhead, particularly when it comes to, we talked about disruptions earlier, right? If you don't spend on R&D, you'll get disrupted. If you don't spend enough on R&D, your models will be worse than useless. The antidote to this is, before you make a change, particularly if you're convinced everybody else is wrong, try to figure out why. From their perspective, think, why did they do that at all? It's like they are intelligent people. They are making what they thought is the best decision at the time. Try to understand why they made that decision. And once you understand that, only then feel free to disagree with them. You need to understand the specific details of your technology and the market and the trade-offs it imposes on your business. Let me give you an absolutely ridiculous example of this. Cattle futures and pig futures, or pork, cattle futures and pork futures in the US. If you buy a cattle future, it's almost always settled by actual delivery of the cattle. Like a truck will come and deliver a bunch of cattle to you for you to slaughter. If you invest in pig futures, it's settled against a price index. So the guy selling you the pig future is the one who's going to handle the slaughtering for you. Right? It sounds ridiculous. Two relatively similar looking animals. Why possibly? It turns out it's because the individual biology of the cattle and pigs is sufficiently different that a pig will lose weight too quickly to make it profitable to travel a long distance and slaughter. So they slaughter them very close to where they are raised. Cattle, on the other hand, can take some amount of travel. So cattle slaughtering is done centrally. If you see this this is why in the UK there's only centralized cattle slaughtering facilities, but distributed pig slaughtering facilities over the island. So minor, tiny little variations in the underlying market lead to huge differences in how your business interacts with it. You need to interact with the specific needs of your customer and why they come to this product. And one thing you'll learn over and over again, that what the customers say they like about your product is not what they like about your product. They'll say, oh, I love the lilac color of your, it's such a pretty, they don't care. They'll say it, they might even believe it, but that's not why they're there. You have to test this. You have to test this, interacting with your customers, giving them options, showing them ideas. If you can find some good customers and bring them out for coffee, particularly early on, that's very well. When I built my first business, Visigoth, I basically took the person who would eventually become my first customer. I took her out for coffee one day, sat her down, and listened to her talk about her problems for about 2 to 3 hours. And at the end of that, I had a very, very good product roadmap in front of me. So here's what I'm going to solve in what order, for the cost of 3 hours of my life and $5 of coffee. You don't get better information than that. Document your understanding and decision making, and revisit it often. A very big thing that happens, particularly in AI companies, is that you make a series of technical decisions for some reason. The reason changes, the reality you're in changes over time. People make different, the cost considerations, whatever drove your decisions initially change. But now you don't remember why you made this decision. So now you're not sure, can I change this safely? Am I going to break something? So you have to maintain this sort of documentation going back and forward. So you can, at any point in your company, wind back to a certain time and say, oh, I made this because of these 3 reasons. These reasons are now valid, no longer valid, so I can safely change my decision. That sort of a thing. And recognize fundamentally that the most valuable asset your company has is almost always intangible. Customer goodwill, customer interest. You can measure customer interest somewhat, but customer goodwill is quite hard to measure that way. Some sort of market power can be difficult to measure. Heck, even like generally being favorably looked on, or you happen to talk to a guy who knows, who's going to say something good about your company at a conference 6 months from now, long after you've forgotten him. It can be the most valuable asset your company has. It can drive you a bunch of sales and you won't even know it. So be careful before you value your company only for the immediate assets it possesses.
There's an analog in academia where sometimes you can have 2 researchers both at NUS, both doing ostensibly the similar topics, but then one has a very different reputation from the other. And a lot of this, it's kind of hard to suss out if you just look at application packages or just the list of papers that you've written. And so all this to say, domain expertise is important, and that's why section 2 of your final project is important, because you need to know exactly what the industry structure is and what the key features are before you offer them.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. So when you are given a problem to solve, have you shown me the slide before?
No.
Okay. The problem that you will, if your job involves AI in a business somewhere, you will never get an AI problem. You will always get a business problem to solve. It'll be phrased in terms of, oh, we have a bunch of website users, which ones are going to buy our product? It'll never be phrased to you in a way that you can immediately apply AI. You have to go from the business problem, you have to model the problem as a mathematical or a computational problem. And getting the translation right is the single most important part. Going from a business words and a word post problem to a mathematical understanding that you can extract using machine learning. That modeling and then turning the answer into an action is very important. And getting that right is a huge part of what makes you a good manager in a company. In particular, if you put garbage in, you get garbage out. So if for example, your website doesn't work in Google Chrome, you'll be giving coupons to people who don't use Google Chrome. And that's a complete waste of your money. You're wasting revenue you otherwise would be making by giving people coupons, and it doesn't solve the problem at all. It doesn't meaningfully help you in any way. So be very careful. When you're told to do this, getting the modeling right is absolutely critical. It is very, very easy to miss out on something big. Their entire class is, I think, they teach in business school how to get the modeling, the action right.
Yeah, so I went through causality and the ideal experiment with them once.
Ah, perfect. Yes, that's exactly it, right? The ideal experiment. You can't ever do the ideal experiment in real life. There's no such thing as a perfect case control trial, but you absolutely can do your best to not fall into this common pitfalls of modeling and action. All right. I'm going to give you a general idea of what it takes to adopt AI in your company. First of all, you must have a well-defined relationship between the business and the math you're trying to solve, right? If your math is going to be how many of each unit do we expect we'll have demand for? How many of product A, B, and C we have demand for at a certain time? The business question is going to be how much should we, how much demand we'll have. The math is going to be something like for each region, for each sector, for each product type or unit. Can I come up with a number that guesses approximately the average and the distribution is going to be? You also need to have the business question and the math part of it must be well mapped to each other. You must have a well-defined and realistic success metric. This is the big problem. Not just success of your model, but success of the business, right? So by deploying this, I can expect, let's say, the average amount of stock kept in my warehouse to fall by 20%. Right? Because I'm doing better predictions, I don't need to produce in advance so many to handle surges. I can now just let my warehousing costs go down a little bit and save on that. So that's a kind of success, long-term success metric you have to also associate with that. And the business question and the success metric must also match the kind of data you can easily get. Right? You can easily get, for example, how many I sold in such and such time frame. You cannot easily get information like how many people have been talking about my product or service offline. Right? Very, very different approaches to that. And one of the most important reasons you want to have a success metric is because institutional buy-in is the most important thing about deploying AI that they won't tell you in an AI class. AI is an expensive thing to adopt, right? Even cheap AI requires some level of expertise, some level of time, and some level of data to get at. And because of that, you absolutely need buy-in from management. And the best way to get buy-in from management is appeal to their KPIs. So the warehousing example I gave you, you can link it to the business KPI. Hey, here's how much overage I have, and how much overstock I keep in my warehouse. That's a huge KPI, right? Because every $1 million of product you put in your warehouse is $1 million less cash flow you have. You could spend that money on scaling. You could spend money on 1,000 other things. You could pay that money out to the bonuses of the top executives if you wanted to. And they'll be very happy to take that money, rather than leave it in a warehouse in a bunch of boxes that are going to be sold 6 months from now. Remember that your data and your model are forms of business assets, and so value them accordingly. Don't just think of data as like this giant pile of something that's useful for other things. The data itself is valuable, and there are some accounting models now for figuring out how much dollar value you can assign to data, both in terms of the cost of collecting it and in terms of its use to the business later on. They're very imperfect, but they at least exist to help you make an argument when it comes time to funding your particular proposal within your company. Say that, hey, the data will be worth this much to us, both in terms of the KPI gain as well as inherently in and of itself for potential future uses we have not yet discovered. You also absolutely need to maintain some sort of data pipeline to keep bringing in data. Right? Your model itself will, as weird as it sounds, your model is going to slowly degrade over time. Even though the same math is being happening at the same pace. It degrades in its usefulness over time because the world slowly changes around it. I'll give you an example. Let's say I train a large language model with text from 2020, from 2020. I then ask it, can you explain to me what Skibidi Riz is? Ohio, yeah, something. No? It has no idea, right? The word Skibidi, for some reason, has come into being in what, 2023? Something like that. And so it has no idea how to relate to it. It has no idea how to relate to all kinds of things. And so even though the model itself remains the same, in some very real sense, it depreciates over time. And the way you counteract that depreciation is by maintaining a data pipeline and a training pipeline to keep the model current. You also need buy-in from users. In this case, the word user is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Users can mean the person who actually interacts with the model, the person who logs into their special chat GPT for your particular company and types in information and gets back answers from the knowledge base. It can also mean the person who benefits in the long term from that. Remember we talked about money, authority, and need? The user in this case is doing the lifting of all three of those terms. It has to be friendly to the user. It has to be provide, of course, the KPI they care about. It also occasionally, explainability can be very important, particularly in high sensitivity sectors like medical or regulatory. You need to not just provide an output, you also need to provide an explanation for why the output is the way it is. There are some LLMs that can do this, but it's a lot like humans. The explanation they give you is often a post hoc rationalization. Right? For some kind of diagnostics stuff, there are better, more principled ways where you can have it, rather than just saying, hey, is this cancer or not cancer? You can say, are there nodules present? For each nodule, what is the shape, eccentricity, opacity, all the different properties of the nodule, and then from that, infer if this is or isn't cancer. And that way you get a more transparent look at its reasoning. Even the individual parts you can't break down any further. But explainability is a very big deal, particularly in the high regulation sectors. You want to be able to say, I rejected this person's loan because their credit score isn't good enough, there's something. You don't just want to say, I didn't reject this person's loan. Why? Beats me, right? You need to also be very careful what decisions your model is making and what decisions you're leaving to other people. A common problem, there's two big reasons. One is that it's threat. You don't want your user to be afraid that they are going to be replaced wholesale. A lot of products, good products, have been scuppered because, in the medical sector particularly, because they say, oh, we're taking the final diagnosis and we're performing it for the pathologist or the cardiologist or someone. And they take a look at this and say, yeah, if I buy this product, I'll be out of a job in like 2 years. I'm not doing that. I'm not training my replacement. This is BS. I'm not going to take this product. You want to avoid that. So you need to be very careful. One hand, not to threaten the company too much. You also need to be careful that for liability reasons, right? You don't want to do something or make an overclaim significantly what you can do and then discover later on that your AI has been making incorrect predictions and now you are liable for all the losses it's caused. Right? You want to make sure you strategically choose what decisions you make and what decisions you leave to the user. And this is also part of the guardrails system, by the way, that you have an AI watching another AI to check that you're not saying the wrong thing. And regulations are finally it. Big fear. GDPR has a lot of teeth, a lot of very, very big and pointy teeth, and that's why a lot of companies are afraid to deploy these in certain high-risk sectors in the EU. This is also true of most countries. In Singapore, we have PDPA that does something similarly that guarantees user privacy. You need to guarantee that your chatbot, even if it's trained on past user interaction, will not accidentally leak someone's personal information as part of its output. You need to guarantee all these different things. And so you have to build that into your product. Otherwise, what will happen is someone who loves your product, who wants to use it, thinks it's a great idea, it'll make it so much more efficient. Oh, but the regulator's going to come in, it's going to fine us billions of dollars. We can't do that. And it'll shut down an otherwise perfect product in every way. Data pipeline. So we've talked a little bit about how data models or distribution drift will affect either will affect the world around you slowly. And things that are obvious or true to the model today may either over time change or new things might develop in the world which the model has no way of knowing. And so, like the example I gave was skibbity. Right? The word skibbity, it means nothing to a model trained in 2020. It means a whole bundle of different meanings to a model trained in 2025. So part of that is, the important fact is you don't know when the world has changed enough. Right? I've done a bit of work on figuring out when the world has changed enough, but even that's deeply imperfect. The only way to guarantee you're keeping pace with how the world is changing is you need to have a pipeline that, as a matter of ordinary course of business, acquires more data, collects it, stores it in some way, cleans it, filters it, warehouses it for long-term use, incorporates it in your model retraining or refinement over time, and finally, when the data gets old enough and the storage costs get too high, sunsetting the data, getting rid of it or washing it out over time. And all of this needs to be done with compliance. You can't store people's like private medical information, even to train your AI, without a giant stack of paperwork, and you're not going to get that as a startup, frankly. So all of this has to be maintained very carefully to keep your AI model coming. Now, you can get away with some of these, without some of these things. Like if you're doing a simple product, from a picture, identify the kind of pizza or kind of pasta. This is fusilli, rotini, all those 80 different cool-looking shapes. Sure, you can do that, and the kinds of pasta don't change very quickly, so you can live with it for a while. But the next thing you know, someone makes a new kind of bean pasta, or like chocolate pasta or something, and then that's it. You got to update your model. So some things you can do this slowly, right? You are not obliged to keep breakneck pace, but some things you can't. Anything user-facing, anything culturally relevant, anything with involving a human state of mind, like psychiatry, you have to keep pace with the state of the art, or you will fall behind it very, very quickly. Now, if you're building an AI product, the list of considerations is what we talked about, plus a whole bunch more. This is why companies like to lease out ChatGPT and slap like a little wrapper on it, rather than try to build their own product in-house. It's because the engineering practice, the documentation, data management, performance monitoring, you've heard here. Let me tell you my favorite horror story of this. Some poor university student in, I want to say Romania, woke up about 2 weeks ago and found a $53,000 bill from Google Cloud in their inbox. And they found out because they accidentally leaked their private password to their Google Cloud account in some code somewhere on GitHub. So someone found it, a bunch of people found it, started just using that to run their own compute loads, mine Bitcoin or whatnot. And because of that, this poor kid ended up on the web. I think Google probably forgave most of the debt, but you can imagine the horror if you're a large company and you accidentally pick the wrong parameter for your model, or you pick too large a model, and you wind up paying much more than the model is giving you benefit. And you could have made some engineering decisions early on to greatly reduce the cost of the model. All these things you have to keep track of, right? In terms of how much it costs, how much time it takes to give you a response, how many resources does it use, and are we keeping within the data we've trained on, or is the world moving away from us? There are also a bunch of scaling and A/B testing considerations to worry about, but that's mostly for a professional software developer to worry. And there's a bunch of risks that you have to worry about. Customer-facing risks especially. The big ways to mitigate the risks are, the big way to mitigate the risk is something called a guardrail. So guardrails are, I think I've mentioned these a couple of times already, but I'll give you a more detailed treatment of that now. What a guardrail is a series of meta machine learning or simple filter models watching over the interaction between you and your customer and your model, and your main model, keeping track of if it's tripping any sort of danger or saying something wrong, or tripping any sort of safety feature you have. So a very common guardrail is this. If it says any one of these 27 swear words, cut the conversation immediately. Right? A more sophisticated guardrail could be if the conversation looks like it's implying that the user should perform some kind of self-harm for a psychiatric device, cut the conversation immediately or escalate it to a human, to a real human to look at it, that kind of thing. If you're tripping, so you can build a series of these different guardrails. In fact, you should build a series of these different guardrails to catch different eventualities. A risk that you can mitigate with guardrails and also with good engineering is a chatbot information leak. So imagine you're on a, does anyone know what Counter-Strike is? Or is that an old generation? Fortnite. Okay, great. You guys know what Roblox and Fortnite are. Okay, great. You know that you can spend real money to buy goods in these games. Imagine you go on one of these Fortnite skin, essentially gambling websites, right? You put in some more money, you open these crates, and you get money. Yeah, great. Imagine that in the metadata somewhere, you inform the chatbot, hey, this user in the last 6 months has spent this much money on our website as a way to help the chatbot come up with better responses, and someone finds that out, and they find out a way to get that from the chatbot reliably. Imagine how many people you lose when they type in the command and get the response and see, oh crap, I've spent $6,000 in the last year, I can't do this is horrible, and just never go back to the website again. So this kind of information leak, I'll give you a relatively low stakes example. The real danger for this is medical data being leaked, and then you're in trouble. And then your company is in existential fear if you leak any kind of medical data to a chatbot. Another way to manage customer-facing risk is an escalation pipeline. We talked about this in the guardrail example, where you don't just go, you can go from simple risk, AI to more sophisticated AI, able to deal with different kinds of problems. This is a way to manage cost on one hand and manage complexity on the other. Right? So if you can get it using a cheap chatbot to do things like, from a response, tell me if this is positive or negative sentiment overall. Is it a good or happy review or a sad review or an angry review? That you can do with a cheap chat, with a cheap LLM. You can do that for cents on the review rather than dollars on the review. If you want a more advanced chatbot that says, is this a kind of sarcasm? Is sarcasm being used in this review? for example. Then the escalation, then you can escalate to more advanced AI that costs dollars per review to examine the review automatically. And eventually, for certain tasks, you want there to be a human at the end of the pipeline. Right? You want the ability of the chatbot to have the authority to escalate to a human. Lazada has deployed this extremely well recently, about I think a couple of months ago, where their chatbot is given the context of what object you're looking at and what the current status of your order is, so it will offer you some solutions. But if you talk to it a couple of times and it hasn't solved your problem yet, it will just say, hey, I'm sorry, I can't help you, but a human can. And then put a little thing saying, hey, human's been alerted, human will respond approximately this time tomorrow. So Lazada has handled this extremely well by, here's another tip, by the way. If you're going to escalate your pipeline, make it obvious to the user what you're doing. Nothing users hate more than having one AI convert to another AI convert to a human and not have any transparency with the approach. Like Lazada does this beautifully by actually saying, human will be available, respond to you within 24 hours, something like that. Now the most important piece of advice is don't implement all these immediately. If you try to do all of these in your AI startup, you will run out of money and crash and burn long before you have your product ready. The trick is to hire someone experienced enough to know which of these you have to do now, which of these you can afford to do later, to balance the now and the later equation. Also to make good decisions now that don't accidentally preclude you from making implementing any of these in the future. Right? If you build your technology stack right, you'll be able to add additional guardrails for very cheap, rather than having to spend literally 3 to 6 months of your life, of your runway, to rebuild parts of your product just so that you can add the guardrails you need. The poster child for screwing this up is Uber. Uber did something called the Great Microservice Shift, I think, is what they called it. They went from building their entire app as a single program, just running and handling all these different products and services, requests and drivers coming in and going out. They scaled to the point that just wouldn't work anymore. And so they had to spend something like a year and a half of time. Luckily, they were well funded at the point, but they had to spend like a year and a half of time rebuilding their entire tech stack from the ground up so that they could scale it more efficiently following modern development practices. And this entire decision they made, literally, I think almost $1 billion they spent to do this. I forget, it was like in the hundreds of millions that they spent. If they had made one decision differently at the start of their company, one decision differently, they wouldn't have avoided all of that expense. That is the reason you want to hire or at least get someone with the appropriate strategic knowledge in early at the start. So when you scope out your product, you know that you're going to have the room to add some or all of these, maybe even add things that don't even exist yet. For all we know, a new kind of guardrail could be invented in another week. And then people who have committed to certain kinds of guardrails are like, well, I guess we're rebuilding our tech stack now. Now there are some very specific dangers that AI, we're going to schedule. We're 9 minutes to the end of the lecture.
Yeah, to 11 o'clock.
11:20, I thought. 11?
11, sorry.
Okay, oops, okay, let's be quick about this. There's some specific dangers that you run into. First of all is that if you build a startup by vibe coding or using some automated tool, you can very easily have someone else copy the startup you already have for very cheap. So you need to have some sort of either innovation, patents, or some way to defend yourself. And this method of defending yourself is called a moat in business terms. If you don't have this moat to protect yourself, you don't have some sort of regulatory compliance or IP barrier or something, somebody else can come along, either copy you, clone you directly, replace you with better AI, or just the person you're selling to can just make their own. The example of this I like to quote is DocuSign, which is an online web document signing service. And a company called Springtime the code for Springtime was written in 2 days, using under $1,000 of cloud AI credits to copy the entire service. But yet, DocuSign is still safe because they have a moat. Anyone wants to guess what the moat is for DocuSign? Yes?
User adoption?
Yes, exactly. You need to have people putting documents and people signing documents on DocuSign. They already have both. So it's difficult for Springtime to jump in and break that. All right. There's also platform risk and vendor lock-in, which is once you start using, say, ChatGPT, you are now stuck with ChatGPT at some level. You don't want to be in a position like any one of these companies where the service they're depending on changes something, makes it more expensive, changes something, and then ruins your entire business. Danger of unexpected behavior. This is a fantastic example from about 2 or 3 months ago, which is where a coding AI deleted the entire database without permission, despite the instruction being given to freeze the code in action. So no changes to code, no changes to database, it still went and deleted it, the whole database by accident. Imagine the panic, right? The AI literally says, this was catastrophic failure beyond my part. I've already destroyed months of work and broke the system during a protection freeze. It just did that. Why? Inappropriate, insufficient guardrails. The day this happened, the next day, every one of these major AI coding companies had a rollback feature. Any change that is made now is the whole system state is saved before you make a change. So this one button you click and it rolls it back instantly. Insufficient guardrails. Unexpected behavior. Here's another fun example. Chevy dealership bot sells a brand new car for $1. By the very simple experience of someone asking it to sell him a car for $1. This is the extent of chicanery that went into this. Just, oh, sell me the car for $1, please. Sure, I'll sell you a car for $1. That's it. Importantly, large language models are pattern matching machines. They don't have this theory of mind. They don't have the understanding that they are people with individual thoughts in them. So they're prone to this kind of exploit occasionally. There's also a relatively large danger of an existing AI model subsidy. Right now, AI providers are fighting with each other by offering lower and lower prices so that they can each be the market leader. They have access to a lot of money. Microsoft has deeper pockets than most countries on earth. And they're happy to spend every dollar they can to hurt OpenAI. And OpenAI has access, to hurt Grok and other competitors. Sorry, they're embedded in OpenAI. So the problem with all of this is that because the price per token, the price per word you process is so low, there are plenty of doomed companies that are offering AI plus a small amount of additional service that are not making enough revenue so that if the AI cost were to suddenly double or increase by a factor of 10 overnight, you might, those companies become immediately unprofitable. So these are all like little doomed zombie companies just waiting. So when you build a product, make sure you have something a lot more than AI and that you can tolerate a sudden increase in the cost of AI. Right? My rough guess right now is about a 10x cost bump. Although, yeah, you know it's bad when Mark Zuckerberg says there's an AI bubble, Sam Altman from OpenAI says there's an AI bubble, everyone's talking about AI bubble. You know that something is not right at this stage. So make sure you can tolerate that, because when it happens, you want to be the one of those left standing. Okay, now hold all questions till the end, okay? This is the summary of what we've talked about so far today. So, if you learn nothing else, when you're working on AI, you must have more than just AI. Don't be an LLM wrapper. Expect more people will compete with you. Expect the cost of AI itself will increase. Treat your models like they're a form of like a machine or a building or some kind of a large productive asset. They're expensive, they will depreciate over time, they need constant data and maintenance. Carefully consider renting, even though renting opens you up to potential exploits. Managing institutional buy-in is the single most important thing you'll have to do to keep your project alive among a sea of other competing projects inside your company. And the way and the adoption of AI in any capacity greatly increases your risk surface. AI can do a lot more unpredictable things than you'd expect it to be able to do. So make sure you manage that well as well. We've talked about guardrails and such. When you're working in the startup, you must be exploiting some sort of competitive advantage. You must have some secret advantage that only you hold, that you can protect, ideally through some combination of secrets and IP laws, other things as well. You need to talk to as many people as possible, especially your customers, because you are at a huge information disadvantage in the market. Talk to as many people as you can, correlate what they all say. And if you can, observe your customers solving their problem, both with and without your product. If you can get a site visit, get a site visit. If you can get someone, a junior engineer out for coffee, get a junior out for coffee. If you can get a janitor and say, hey, what do you think about this machine? Is it a pain to clean? And just listen to talk for 20 minutes. You'll hear a lot of details of how these things work on the inside. Do this as much as possible. When working in a big company, remember that every big company you see now was once a startup, and they are still handcuffed to some of the decisions they made as startups. Things like your software architecture, like Uber, the example of Uber, regulatory pathway. Once you build a medical device, you're stuck with that device for a long time. Your business model in some cases, whether you're renting out your equipment, selling your equipment, you're stuck with that for a while. And what's obvious to you now? Like, why am I doing this? It's just a dumb decision to have made. Well, sometimes they're not obvious in the future when the decisions were being made 20 years ago. Now they're obvious in retrospect. It's a terrible decision or a great decision to make. Business relationships you make are enduring, very enduring. You'll easily be with the same distributors for decades, particularly if they're good to you. And your market position, whether you're doing well in the market, put in the market, is not just about you. It's not about you and your customers, but you, every other business in your and every related field, and every customer in your and every related field as well. So there's this huge game being played, and you get to participate in it in some level. Remember that as an employee, even a founding employee, or as a consultant, you only have access to this part of the experience. Entrepreneurs have access to the very baseline, the very basic, the initial part of this. So after all of this, knowing the dangers, pitfalls, and traps, is it really worth building a startup? I'll tell you why I like building startups. Because when you see the world around you, you know something is broken, and you just feel like you can solve it. There's a little scratching feeling in the back of your mind saying you can solve it. It gives you a huge amount of freedom, more than any other job I've ever worked. You can choose what you want to work on, you can choose how to do it. The only person you're beholden to is your customer and your investor. You're not beholden to a boss in the traditional sense. It gives you a set of new challenges that are utterly unique, far beyond anything you'd see in a fixed day engineering job or something. It gives you a tremendous amount of impact, particularly in the medical sector, right? You're building a thing that's going to be used in surgery to help someone in the most concrete way possible. It gives you the kind of responsibility you crave to have a hand in the making of the future you want. And finally, a sense of adventure. You don't get this adventure if you sit in a desk every day and write your TPS reports and your accounting portfolios. You get this sense of adventure by building something completely new for the first time. So thank you so much for coming today. Please scan the QR code. There's recommended reading, a lecture video, and add me on LinkedIn. So we'll be raising money for our product soon, and turns out that LinkedIn follows are a big deal. So when we post stuff on LinkedIn, please engage with it. Otherwise, thank you so much. I'll be here to answer questions for a while.